Hey there, folks. I am now officially in a post-Spider-Man daze. And because I still have the urge to scratch that modern Marvel game itch, it got me thinking that maybe since it was such a huge success, it might be time that we dabbled in some other Marvel property adaptations. After all, there have been very few other Marvel games in recent years, at least outside of mobile, which, let's be honest, doesn't really even count. Am I right? We used to get all kinds of licensed Marvel games, mostly from X-Men and Spider-Man, but around the PS3, Xbox 360 era, a lot of terrible movie tie-in games essentially killed any more attempts to adapt Marvel characters into AAA titles, aside from a few exceptions and the usual slew of LEGO games. Now, after how good Spider-Man on PS4 has been, and with Crystal Dynamics' Avengers game hopefully just around the corner, or at least on the way to give us more information, come on guys, I thought it would be fun to brainstorm some ideas of other Marvel properties that would be equally good to develop in the modern renaissance of licensed games. And in some cases, even pitching what studio should make the games, if I feel inspired that far. I don't know. We'll see where the video takes us. I want to keep this fun and flirty, you know? So, without further ado, let's get on to the first game pitch. Iron Man. This one seems fairly obvious. I've even already seen fan mock-ups of what a modern Iron Man game could look like. The reason this is worth mentioning, though, is because we actually have a game coming out soon from BioWare that seems like perfect inspiration for a future Iron Man game. Anthem. In that, you play as a mech pilot in various mechanical suits that have their own strengths and weaknesses and fly out on different missions to do whatever the game has you do. There's not a lot of info yet, okay? But between this and Titanfall, I can't believe there hasn't already been an Iron Man game in development, as it's a natural fit for the same audiences that play those types of games. Moving past gameplay inspiration, a modern Marvel game would also need to justify its development with a good story and a strong supporting cast, or else there's really no point in using that property. So, I think an Iron Man game could do proper justice to the Extremist storyline from the comics, or at least do a better job than Iron Man 3 did. That movie was fine and had some great action, but it was a very loose adaptation. Extremis, for those that don't know, is similar to the super soldier serum from Captain America, but when injected, it provides the host with accelerated healing, improved organs, basically means they're better at thinking and running and stuff, as well as enhanced strength and other usual super serum powers. But it also increases aggression, leading to unpredictable personality changes. Tony Stark managed to adapt this ability to remove the negative effects on superpowers and instead use the improved brain power to increase his information processing abilities and mentally interface with his suit, as well as other machines, making him a more efficient Iron Man. This was somewhat adapted in the movie by allowing him to call parts of his suit to his body on command. This simple setup was a great premise for a game where the player earns new abilities and levels up, getting stronger as you progress the game, because the Extremis working inside him would actually improve and become smarter over time through machine learning, so there's a gameplay explanation for what the character experiences, as well as reasons to introduce new powers and gadgets throughout the game as Tony tinkers more with different machines and suit parts to interface with his Extremis suit. It also naturally sets up the enemy force in the game, as there would be an army of Extremis-fueled super soldiers led by either Malin, the codename of the villain from the Extremis comics, or the Mandarin and the Ten Rings if they want to tie it into a larger narrative that might be more familiar to Iron Man fans, or even some new character entirely, similar to how the movie used Eldritch Killian. Regardless, though, the release of the Extremis virus allows the story to escalate, as Iron Man first starts without the increased power, and then works to develop the serum, inject it in himself, and then has to deal with it after it's gotten into the wrong hands, and then the characters and villains that are created with it, and finally, possibly a larger public exposure like in the comics to increase the threat level by the endgame. And why not let Respawn make the game while we're at it? They can put their skills from Titanfall into it and have the traditional Iron Man free roam elements, flying around in the open world cityscape, combined with some out-of-suit sections where Tony uses more compact gadgets and suit pieces to get through stealthier, ground-level sections, similar to playing as MJ and Miles in Spider-Man, where they just have a few gadgets and their environments to use to their advantage. That would help mix up the gameplay and also add some stakes, as Iron Man is notoriously overpowered in his suit, even able to go toe-to-toe with Thanos in the most recent movie. Plus, one of the strengths of Iron Man 3, as an Extremis adaptation, was that it showed him still succeeding even without his suit, so I'd love that adapted to a video game as well, and Titanfall 2's story found that balance of mech and human in a similar way, though on a smaller, slower scale, and I'd argue it didn't do it as successfully as an Iron Man game probably could. But that's enough with our boy Stark. Let's move on to a less obvious choice. The Defenders. Say what you will about the Netflix series of the same name or any of the individual shows leading up to it, but it really did show how Daredevil, Luke Cage, Jessica Jones, and Iron Fist all have their own strengths and weaknesses and playstyles, so to speak, as part of a larger group. I would love to see this team play to their strengths in various mission types, similar to how Assassin's Creed Syndicate lets you switch back and forth between two characters that each have their own skill trees and specialties for different missions. In this example, I picture Iron Fist being the basic brawler type. I realize they all have fighting ability, but he is the martial artist and the mystical guy that literally has a magical fist used for punching fools. Doesn't get more combative than that. Daredevil, comparatively, would be the stealth character. You'd actually play his missions through his vision, which would look similar to detective mode in the Batman Arkham games, but would only highlight moving enemies or objects, so that even in rooms with no light he can sneak around and do his thing, but he'd be at a disadvantage with other silent foes because his sight is based on movement and sound. He would have some limited gadgets, such as his grapple cane that they introduced in Season 2 of his Netflix show, as well as ranged throw weapons to silently take isolated enemies off guard from a distance. Jessica Jones, on the other hand, would be more focused on real-world investigation, since she doesn't wear a costume or hide her identity. Her missions would break up the combat and use her camera and attitude to find where other characters need to go for their missions. There would be interrogation-style minigames, similar to a mix between LA Noire and the PS2 Punisher game, where she would have to choose the best dialogue options to get the information she needed, or strong-arm enemies into giving up the important information. And then she'd also have to stay out of enemy radar while getting good pictures to use against them. I honestly think her playstyle could support its own game in a fun way, but I prefer the team concept to mix things up more, and because it just hasn't really been done before, and I think it would give a little something for everyone. Spider-Man proved that there's merit in mixing up the gameplay style with different playable characters sometimes, so you could just think of Jessica Jones as the main character, getting all the information in the open world, and then cutting to whichever other brute force hero is needed to handle the given mission she discovers, since she tends to only fight if she has to. Lastly, Luke Cage would be the heavy lifting character. He can go toe-to-toe with pretty much anyone, and sometimes you just need to break some things to get by, or, as I mentioned, do some heavy lifting. This would play out similarly to the Hulk Ultimate Destruction game, but on a smaller scale. He'd use the environment more to his advantage in combat and wouldn't have to worry so much about his health meter, since he's bulletproof, but would have a destruction meter and would be ranked by the amount of unnecessary collateral damage he does completing his missions. There would be some missions where you swap between multiple characters to do various parts of the mission, similar to the heists in GTA 5, but most missions would focus on one or two characters at a time, as the story involves them struggling to actually work as a team. This would also give a lot of opportunity to bring in other neglected street-level heroes, or anti-heroes, to take the spotlight, either as side characters that assist you as unplayable allies in missions, or even as the villains to fight. I can picture the likes of Punisher, Moon Knight, Bullseye, Typhoid Mary, Hellcat, and more popping up over the course of the game as allies, enemies, or both. I just like the idea of giving the street-level heroes the spotlight. No web swinging or flying all over the city, no world-hopping adventure, just a group of mildly superpowered people exploring the Hell's Kitchen area, breaking down doors, and fighting in hallways. Think of it as a video game adaptation of the Netflix series, but with the full backing of the Marvel Comics universe, a much less meandering, awkward plot, and a way better version of Iron Fist. Not that it could probably get any worse.
I'm the immortal Iron Fist.
You what?
Come on, we were all thinking it. But just picture the gameplay. Jessica gathers information, Daredevil sneaks around to get the truth, Luke punches them until they talk, and Iron Fist cleans up the hordes of thugs in more Arkham-style swift group combat. They have the potential to play off each other so well, and I'd love to see the way the right studio could use that dynamic to the player's advantage. If Rocksteady isn't actually working on a Superman game right now, or still in WB's pocket in some other way, I actually think their Batman Arkham street-level mentality would suit this game extremely well. But otherwise, another studio that could mimic that style successfully would be just as good, such as maybe Sucker Punch, who did the Infamous games. Let's move on to a different type of multi-character dynamic though. Ant-Man and the Wasp. The love of these two characters has been rekindled after the most recent Marvel movie released, and I think their size-changing mechanic could make for some really fun gameplay mechanics, if done right. This is one example where I think it would be best to actually base the game off the movies, but with its own story and elements, so it doesn't have to be canonical, it just kind of exists in that world with those versions of the characters. I picture the two of them side by side, either as a co-op campaign a la Resident Evil 5, or just smart companion AI for single player, such as the new God of War game, where they act on their own, but whichever one you're not controlling, you can still guide the actions when needed. In combat, you would actually manipulate size in real time to change how hard your character hits. Hitting a button to go small to avoid a hit, and then a slowdown triggers, and you have to hit the button prompt at the perfect moment to go large again and maximize damage, or risk just collapsing into a wall and taking damage, or something like that. It would turn combat into kind of a rhythm game. The single player would switch between which character is active at any given moment to utilize their unique abilities. Ant-Man can go large in certain sections for brief periods, and he can throw discs to change the size of objects around him for puzzle-solving mechanics, and Wasp can fly and fire paralyzing blasts that can stun enemies as well as overload electronics and puzzles. The hook of the game would be in the shrunk sections, where whole missions would take place inside everyday objects, such as hacking an enemy's computer for information, but having to navigate through the inside of the computer to get to the hackable terminal, or dodging seemingly normal things like raindrops and insects while stalking an enemy in a park. This game would be unique in that whereas most games now feel the need to make their world bigger and bigger so there's enough to explore, this game would focus on a smaller world map, but with a ridiculous amount of smaller little details and space to explore, opening up a larger world inside the smaller regular world, where a lot of the collectibles and secrets would be. The only example I can think of that's similar to this is Katamari Damacy, where you see the same level from the ground, but eventually get so large that the world around you seems much smaller. Think of that reversed, where the map is fairly small, but shrinking down reveals how large it really is for you to explore all the hidden nooks and crannies. The story, as it exists inside the MCU, would focus on the family dynamic with Scott, Hope, and Hank, as well as Scott's daughter Cassie wanting to take after her father and become a superhero of her own, which was kind of lightly teased in Ant-Man and the Wasp. A new enemy threatens the team, which I won't decide here as it doesn't really matter to me who it is, and Scott and Hope insist Cassie avoid that life after Hank's mind continues to deteriorate from his time in the quantum realm, and Scott starts to feel a physical toll from size changing the Ant-Man suit is taking on his own body. Here there would be a subplot of Cassie taking it upon herself to learn to fight, and she starts trying to take on small-time crime by herself in secret, but then she gets caught up in the larger villain story, and Scott and Hope have to team up to save her. and in the process decide that Cassie might be better off with them protected with a suit than on her own. There would definitely be some tough development challenges to make with this game, as you'd have to have free agency as a player, but also the idea of molding an entire world where the player can change size big or small at will, and the world has to adapt to that, brings its share of challenges. But the concept is unique enough that I'd love to see a studio take that challenge. I don't know who could do it well though this time, I just want to see it made. These are the kind of cool superpowers that should be represented in video games, rather than the same old combat-focused Batman-style games that have been made so far. And admittedly that I just finished pitching with Defenders. Hey, it's called list variety, okay? Don't judge me. And speaking of not judging me, next up is Hawkeye. Okay, hear me out on this one, because I'm well aware that I make fun of how useless Hawkeye is more than probably anyone else I know. But, to be honest, I stand by that. As he exists in MCU canon at least, there's hardly any reason for him to be there shooting his limited number of normal metal arrows, while Hulk is smashing, Thor is doing God stuff, and Iron Man is using his high-tech suit to blow up everything around him. I do think he would bring an interesting feel to a video game though, as he's distinctly different from all the other superpowered heroes in Marvel's repertoire. His game would play closer to something like Zelda or Assassin's Creed, as he relies on his acrobatics, bow skills, and trick arrows. I'd love to see it play out more as an adaptation of Matt Fraction's Hawkeye solo run in the comics, while also being its own original story that follows the early days of Hawkeye's career as a hero for hire in the larger world of superheroes. This Hawkeye needs to be removed from the superpowers always surrounding him that make him look useless. We also need a Hawkeye that isn't perfect yet, that gets new trick arrows to do different things in platforming sections, such as the grapple arrow and the bomb arrow, while also teaching him new abilities as he gets better at being a hero and goes toe-to-toe with enemies above his pay grade. As I said, the gameplay would be similar to a Zelda game or Tomb Raider or Assassin's Creed. In this game, he explores smaller communities and doesn't have the crazy mobility someone like Spider-Man would have, at least until he gets later abilities like the grapple arrow, where he can get up to higher ledges and things like that. He has limited climbing gear and can grab handholds and stuff, but part of the challenge of missions is how to best take out your target. Almost like the new Hitman game if Agent 47 assassinated everything from 2 buildings away with precision aiming from a compound bow. The story would follow his journey from lowly hero for hire, just struggling to take enough jobs to afford his rent, then up to working for S.H.I.E.L.D. and being sent on larger scale missions with a bevy of gadgets and upgrades, and body armor, luckily letting him take a few more hits, and finally to working alongside the Avengers to take down the large endgame threat. But they wouldn't come in until the final act. I just think it would be fun to see a final, large-scale Avengers fight solely from Hawkeye's view, to better understand his role in the conflict and bring perspective to his place on the team. Plus, it would work to develop his character after starting at the bottom. Early on though, he would have to deal with a lot of lower scale missions, as well as his frenemy relationship with fellow archer Kate Bishop and how she plays into his life in and out of the bedroom. At about the halfway point, S.H.I.E.L.D. would hire him for a mission, though he wouldn't know at the time it's an audition for their special forces, and he'd work alongside someone like Mockingbird, or maybe Black Widow if they prefer to stick with better known MCU characters. This would make Kate jealous as she gets the wrong idea about what he's up to with this beautiful lady assassin, and she sells him out to the enemy group whose leader he had previously worked with Kate to put behind bars. This complicates his relationship with S.H.I.E.L.D. as he's still a new recruit, and he has to juggle his personal and professional lives while trying to keep the good gig he just got. There's actually a lot of potential in this story, and I'm just kind of throwing things at the wall here, so I don't want to go too deep. But I just think a playable character whose main weapon is a bow makes for really interesting gameplay mechanics, as there's less focus on hand-to-hand combat, and the mission structure would allow for some fun platforming and parkour sections as you find the best position to perch and take out enemies unseen, and then get away without being caught by whoever's left. I don't want to delve any deeper into the story, because while it would be an original story, it would still be inspired by characters and situations from the Matt Fraction run, and that story is better than anything I could come up with. So just read it and get a feel for the essence of the world building I'm trying poorly to explain. Though keep in mind, nothing I've said is specifically pulled from that run. It's just a similar idea. Anyway, as fun as this idea is for me, we have one more to get to, so let's move on to X-Men. Okay, this pitch is a little different because there have actually been probably the most X-Men games next to maybe Spider-Man, and a lot of them are even good. So I'd like to see something a little different with the property. In my mind, this would play out like a mix between Infamous and Dragon Age, where you create your own custom mutant at the start and choose different options like physical appearance, where there's a more traditional human-looking character, or a more obvious mutant with different skin color, physical deformity, etc. These would be identified as Morlocks in the game and provide extra bonuses but change how other characters react to you. After the physical creation of your character, you would decide your powers and how that power set evolves over time through the skill tree, with Morlocks getting stronger powers quicker and leveling up faster, but humans being able to blend in society better so they can have an easier time with certain optional quests and world activities, whereas Morlocks have to travel in secret and make use of underground passages. But those passages have unique activities and quests too, giving some incentive to replay value. Once you have your own custom mutant fully created, you are thrust into the world, starting at a mutant internment camp where you meet your first few famous X-Men characters, though still the lesser-known characters that are somewhat expendable. Let's just say that. From here you would have some options available, essentially tasked with finding a way out of the camp, by any means you wish. This would provide you multiple paths out of the camp, and depending on what options you choose and who you team up with, it would set you on a different path through the game. Which, in gameplay terms, would be similar to Infamous, where you can choose the light or dark path. But in this case, you'd either team up with the X-Men or the Brotherhood of Mutants, or potentially be more of a Lone Ranger and make your own way through the world. Though each side would still try to recruit you as you progress. I just want an X-Men game where you feel like an original part of Marvel canon, as the main benefit of X-Men as a property is a diverse cast of characters and how many new ones pop up due to their nature as genetic freaks. I mean...
It's a mutation. It's a very groovy mutation. I've got news for you, Amy. You are a mutant.
First you proposition a girl, and then you call her deformed. How is that seduction technique working for you?
By bringing in the BioWare elements of dialogue trees and ethical decisions to make throughout, it really helps the game feel like an X-Men comic brought to life, as your character has to make the same tough decisions those characters make. The game would play out fairly similar regardless, with the same overall story of warring factions, but you could, for example, team up with Iceman and Storm to take down Magneto and the Brotherhood, or go dark and buddy up to Toad and Mystique as they plot to take out Wolverine and the rest of the X-Men. Or possibly create your own group of rogue mutants, led by Rogue herself probably, which would include different rejects due to appearance, dangerous powers, or family abandonment that have turned them all into isolated nomads looking for a sense of family. I think we've played as the X-Men enough, with varying levels of success. It's time to become a new member and create your own story in that universe. And the best X-Men stories focus on how society views mutants, either by reluctantly accepting them as heroes, shunning them to the outskirts or underground, or even passing laws that ban or kill them on sight. So playing with all those elements in the world would give the characters some agency in the world to find the story that suits them best. To be transparent, it's at this point of the pitch that I've remembered X-Men Destiny was a game that came out, which is overall the same idea I'm pitching. But that game was a lot of good ideas in a terrible final package, so what I'm pitching is to take that game and make it a good game instead. In this game, your choices would actually matter, and the power sets and combat would be fun and make you feel like an X-Man. Basically, it would be everything X-Men Destiny wasn't. There'd even be opportunities along the way to switch sides, as you learn more about your companions and make decisions and missions that could make them trust you less, or convince you to join them on the other side if you start to doubt your current path. Kill someone instead of incapacitate them? Colossus might scold you about the ethics of the X-Men, similar to his speech in Deadpool 2. Disobey orders and stop Juggernaut when he has Cyclops in a death grip? The Brotherhood might start to question your loyalties, but you get a call from the X-Mansion asking you to meet them alone to discuss your motives with the Brotherhood. X-Men storytelling has always been at its best when it plays around in that gray area, and I don't think any game has done a good job at bringing that to life in the way that an action role-playing style game could do, with combat and world exploration similar to Infamous, where different power sets explore the world in different ways, but a story that's molded by your actions, similar to Fallout or Dragon Age. That would be my dream X-Men game. It might actually be my favorite pitch on this list, even though you don't play as an established X-Men character. Picture something like City of Heroes or DC Universe Online, but without the repetitive MMO elements, and a better fleshed out story using established X-Men characters. Or just picture if X-Men Destiny was good. Are you sold yet? Great! Let me know which studio needs to buy this pitch from me, and then let's wrap this up! So, those are 5 of my pitches for new Marvel games I'd love to see made, all with their own playstyles and character variety. Everything from multi-character brawler-type games, to stealthier parkour-based games, to large, choice-based RPG-style games, and more. There's so much potential with the breadth of Marvel properties out there. I'm surprised more game developers haven't already jumped on the opportunities out there. But Marvel reached out to Insomniac and let them make a game out of anything they wanted. They just chose Spider-Man. So who knows? Maybe some more studios will get similar opportunities and make something like the options I've pitched here. We still don't know what the Avengers game will be like, aside from multiple playable characters, so there's clearly some major studios working on great things outside of the same old Telltale and Lego games that will never end. Ooh, never end? Yeah, this script hasn't aged well. Whoops, I'm sorry. Let's just hope someone important watches this and steals my ideas. Seriously, I encourage it. Maybe just give me a special thanks in the credits when it's done. That's all I ask. It would be awesome to be in the credits of a game that I didn't pay to help make, you know? It's a little different when it's for Kickstarter reasons. Anyway, the onus is on you now, developers. Do your best, please. And of course, as always, you watching this right now, feel free to tell me your game pitches in the comments below, or just tell me how terrible mine are. This is the internet after all. Someone will undoubtedly call me out. But that's all for now. I've been Zero Score, and you've hopefully been entertained by my rambling. See you next time, true believers. What makes this different from other Spider-Man games, though, is that it sometimes shifts focus to Venom as a playable character as well, who has a similar playstyle but his own set of moves and urges. Seriously, the dude just sucks the life out of children. Venom doesn't mess around. The armor allows you to go under lava, which doesn't even make sense because if you try to exit the armor under the lava, you die instantly. But there's no protective headgear or anything, so how does it even keep you alive? This game is so dumb. Anyway, while in the lava, you're basically just doing a standard platforming level as enemies charge at you and you knock them out like Thanos versus the Avengers because none of them stand a chance.